Thanks for inviting me here. It's nice to see people who I've seen the last time I came here. I'm delighted to speak to you about why I think that I'm the candidate that's best suited to lead the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office and why I'm here to ask for your support. Leadership is really important in this job, and we're all progressive. We all care about criminal justice reform. This group is a very educated group. But what does it mean to actually implement the reforms we talk about? We read about a lot of reform. We read about closing Rikers Island. We read about bail reform. We read about wrongful convictions. But what does it take to actually lead an office to make sure that all of those things happen? That's where I think that I differ from all the other candidates, and I'll explain to you why. It's my experience and it's my vision. I have a very unique experience. While all of us have been assistant district attorneys, there's two aspects of my experience that distinguish me among everybody else. First is that when I was at the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, I was in charge of alternative sentencing. The drug court, the mental health court, the veterans court, the domestic violence court, the youth domestic violence court, the precursor to the youth court. All of those were projects that I worked on, that I was in the planning stages and the implementation stages. But we can't rest on those laurels, and we certainly can't go back. So what I mean by that is the most expansive use of those current alternative sentencing have to happen now. They cannot retrench. You cannot go back. You cannot have fewer cases in those courts. And then you have to build on those leadership, those collaborations, especially in a post-Trump world. And what I mean by that is that the money that trickles down to the district attorney's office and to programming changes. It changes all the time in another administration. This administration has threatened us with changes unprecedented, and I believe that that's going to directly impact the work that the DA's office can do. And if you don't have those collaborations already in place, we will miss opportunities for every defendant that's in that court and every victim that's in that court. We can't wait for a program to be delivered in the Brooklyn DA's office with a nice little box and a nice little bow. Here you have it, from some nonprofit that's recently funded that doesn't know anything about criminal justice. We as DAs and I as the district attorney would be proactive in that. There's many opportunities to do that. And the first opportunity that I think of doing that is with Raise the Age. Our legislators changed the age of criminal responsibility, and what this group has read about that. But what this group probably doesn't know, unless you worked in a DA's office or a public defender's office, is that the opportunities to exercise discretion as a district attorney with Raise the Age is enormous now. What they left in criminal court, what they're keeping in family court, the opportunity for something called adjustment, which is when you don't go to court at all, is very, very limited by the current statute. So it requires an extraordinary amount of knowledge of the system, collaborations, to make sure that what the electorate wants, what the voters want, which is that children are not charged as adults because of their adolescent brains, are not treated that way. And I know October 1st, 2018, which is the first date that the first wave of children are going to be treated as children, I will be able to have the leadership and use my discretion to make sure that the cases that need to be in family court are there and that family court is doing what it's supposed to do. We cannot assume just because the word family court is there that they're doing what we think they're doing, which is being more holistic about the child, more appropriate to the child, more appropriate to the child's age. And I will just say that with mass incarceration, which we all care about, nobody would be a member of this club if you didn't care about mass incarceration, and as a district attorney, I care about that too. There are a lot of opportunities that the district attorney exercises her discretion in reducing mass incarceration that does not make us unsafe. That does not make us unsafe. And the 4 ways that I could just briefly say to you now, number 1, charging. We hear a lot about low-level crime, but what is that? Who decides what's low-level crime? The district attorney decides what's low-level crime. The district attorney can charge more felonies and fewer misdemeanors, or more misdemeanors and fewer felonies. That's intake. Intake is an extraordinary place where a district attorney exercises discretion. And having the right amount of staff, the right quality of staff, the right experience of staff allows us to make those discerning decisions that impact the rest of the case. So the quality of intake, the charging decisions is one place for extreme amount of discretion. Second place, of course, is bail. Just because a statute happens doesn't mean that the DA can't exercise discretion before a statutory change. and a DA can't decide that these things will keep a person returning. And so, for example, leadership. What does leadership look like? We could also say we're for bail reform. To me, leadership looks like expanding the statutes that allow for the community bail fund. Right now, the community bail fund is limited to $2,000 in certain crimes, but it's proven to be extremely effective in having a person return to court. Why can't we build on that? And having a district attorney be a partner in legislative change where everybody knows that the district attorney is thinking about safety is very important. The third place that a district attorney exercises discretion that impacts on mass incarceration is discovery reform. Being open to discovery, open file discovery, where you don't, it's not a game. It's not, a person's life is not a game when you're tried for a crime. And it's certainly not a game to the victim, who's the victim of a crime. And it shouldn't happen in gamesmanship. So how discovery, the information back and forth before a case is tried, that's very important. And finally, and this is really what I'm going to probably speak about the least to you, but I probably know the most about, is alternative sentencing. When a person does not go to jail or prison or does not get traditionally held accountable for criminal behavior. And what does that look like? And pushing that out, because we have good programs in Brooklyn that were started many years ago. Some of them are being retrenched, some of them are building upon, but there's a whole world of new kinds of programming that could exist for sex trafficking, for domestic violence, for the victims, and of course, immigration. Because immigration, what we can talk about is what kinds of pleas we can take for low-level crimes, but defining the crime in the first place matters. And then what kind of pleas, of course, are important. But equally as important, when you talk about victims of crime have the right to visas. They have the right, but they need to be assisted in getting those visas. And being assisted in getting those visas are very important. And immigrants are afraid to come down to the DA's office. We need to go out to where they live with culturally competent programming in a language that they speak, in the places that they go, to make sure that we bring them in so that they hold the people that hurt them accountable, so they can't hold anybody in their communities or all of our communities accountable. Okay? Okay.
Awesome. So, Anne, I'm going to go ahead and open up with one question, and then we're going to get some from membership.
Great.
So my question is, we know some of the specific policies of former DA Ken Thompson that we'd like to continue and build on. I'd like to hear one of those policies that you would like to change, something that was happening before that you'd like to do differently, more than reform.
Okay. Looking at the wrongful convictions, I don't think it should be limited to homicide cases. And I think going forward, we have to do more to get it right the first time. Because wrongful convictions are a terrible thing. They're a terrible thing when an innocent person is held accountable for something that person didn't do, but also equally as important as getting it right the first time, because if you get to a conviction of a person who's guilty in the wrong way, that's a wrongful conviction too. So getting it right the first time is really important. And there are systems that could be put in place right now that could get it right the first time. I could elaborate on them in details, but I think there are other questions I'm happy to answer. And by the way, call me, have coffee with me, talk to me after this meeting. I'm happy to go into detail of those kind of systems that could be put in place to get it right the first time and to review the robberies. And I will just say one more thing. What the office needs is an ombudsman, an integrity officer, because what that will do is, say a defense attorney has a exculpatory evidence that they need to get, and an adjournment goes by, another adjournment goes by, a third adjournment, and a person is held in on bail, and they didn't do the crime, and there's exculpatory evidence, and it takes 4 months, 5 months, 6 months to get to that, that person's been sitting in Rikers Island for 6 months until that evidence comes. But if there's an ombudsman who is directly responsible to me and is not cutting through the channels, that defense attorney calls that ombudsman the first time that they don't get that exculpatory evidence, and I make sure that it happens. And if it's systemic, where there's more than one opportunity that happens, that person identifies those things, goes to the police department, goes to the other agencies, and gets that exculpatory evidence for everybody in the city, not just that individual defendant.
So yeah, if membership has any questions, I think we have time for one. If we have any folks we haven't heard from today.
Good. Could I take 1 more minute to talk about 2 things that I didn't say I do, because I thought it would come in the question, but yeah. Okay, number one, why I think that my unique experience, besides what I've told you, is important is After I left the Brooklyn DA's office, where I was for 33 years, I went where nobody else went. I went to the public defender's office, and I was managing counsel there. And that's for two really important reasons that I think you should consider. Number one, I would never have been the managing counsel of the public defender who represents people who can't afford a lawyer in all sorts of cases, criminal, immigration, family, housing, if I wasn't a fair DA, I wasn't approachable, and they didn't know that I knew what justice looked like. So it speaks loudly about who I am for my adversaries in court for 33 years. This was 33 years of adversaries that hired me that way. The second reason why that's really important is my view of justice. My view of justice is not tunnel vision. I wasn't only a DA. I did the exact opposite thing of a DA. I represented people who couldn't afford a lawyer in all sorts of cases, which expanded my view of justice, expanded my empathy for what people face, and my knowledge of what justice looks like. And finally, the other thing that I do for a living is I teach students at Brooklyn Law School, and that's really important because they are the future. They are the future policymakers, they're the future lawyers, they're the future people who interact with everybody. I want them to benefit from my vast and wonderful experience, but I want them to build on our future. And the only way I can pay it forward is to deal with it, is to teach young children, they're not children, but they're young, in a way that shares my experience and gives them the benefit of my counsel. And you know, all of them have volunteered to work on my campaign. They didn't know that I was running for DA because I felt it was really a boundary I didn't cross. So this semester, I was with them for 13 weeks. And the last class, they ran up to me and they said, Professor Swern, we didn't know you were running for Brooklyn DA. Why didn't you tell us? I said, because I thought it was a boundary that I didn't want to cross in the school. I said, how did you find out? Professor Simonson told us. I said, who's Professor Simonson? She works for Bronx Defenders, and she thinks you're a great candidate, and she told us. And they all volunteered to work on my campaign, which I'm really, really grateful for, but it wasn't at my insistence. It was really because of what they learned over the past 13 weeks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.